He never expected a single glance to feel like being hit by a lifetime of regret. Yet when he saw the woman and child huddled on the frozen sidewalk, his heart stopped as if someone whispered a truth he wasn't ready to face. People rushed past them without looking, but he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because something familiar tugged at him with a force that felt almost cruel. Their shivering hands, the small figure wrapped in a coat far too big, the quiet ache in the woman's eyes, all of it pulled him backward into memories he had tried to bury. He wondered how life had broken so sharply without him noticing. He wondered if this was punishment or fate. And as he stepped closer, fear crawled up his spine, telling him he was seconds away from a truth that could destroy every lie he had told himself. Then she lifted her head, and everything inside him shattered. The cold seemed to press harder between them as silence stretched on, filled with memories neither could escape. He tried to find his voice, but guilt tightened around him like invisible chains, reminding him of every moment he walked away when they needed him most. She kept her eyes steady, refusing to blink, refusing to let him see how much seeing him reopened wounds she worked years to close. The child shifted uncomfortably, sensing something heavy yet not understanding the shape of it. People continued rushing around them, unaware of the storm building in the space between three souls who once shared a home. He wondered if he even deserved to speak. But the truth was already clawing at him, louder than the city noise. He tried to explain himself, but every word felt small compared to the years she survived alone. She listened without interrupting, not because she wanted to hear him, but because pain had taught her to stay quiet until she understood the danger in front of her. The child pressed closer to her side, sensing the tremble in her breathing. He wished he could turn back time, wished he could undo all the days she cried with no one there to help, wished he had been the kind of man who stayed. But regret does nothing to warm cold nights, and she knew that better than anyone. When he reached out his hand, she flinched, and the crack in her voice cut deeper than any shout ever could. He stepped back, realizing trust wasn't something he could claim just because he felt guilty. She had been the one who held everything together when everything was falling apart, and the weight of that truth made his chest tighten. The child watched him quietly, studying his face with a mix of fear and curiosity, as if trying to decide whether he was a stranger or someone he should remember. She whispered something to the child, something soft and protective, reminding him that their world had been built on survival, not promises. He felt the distance between them stretch like a river he wasn't sure he could cross. He swallowed hard as she stood up, preparing to walk away, and something inside him broke at the thought of losing them again. The urge to beg rose in his throat, but he fought it back, knowing desperation wasn't enough to erase years of silence. The child held her hand tightly, looking at him with a question he didn't know how to answer. She didn't need his words. She needed proof he had changed, proof that wouldn't come easily. As she turned, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and warning, and he felt the weight of a second chance slipping through fingers that once let go too easily. The cold night followed him long after they disappeared around the corner, settling in his chest like a weight he couldn't shake. He walked the same streets they once called home, every familiar corner turning into a reminder of how quickly he had traded responsibility for escape. He remembered the way their tiny apartment echoed with laughter before life grew heavy, remembered how fear pushed him out instead of pulling him closer to the people who needed him. Now, with every step, he wondered how she kept going when he chose not to. The city lights blurred in front of him, not from the wind, but from the sting in his eyes. He hated the man he used to be, and worse, he feared she still saw him that way. Memory pulled him back to the day everything began to unravel, the day he realized he wasn't ready for the storm that came with responsibility. She had been exhausted but hopeful, holding their child while trying to keep their shrinking world from collapsing. He remembered the way she looked at him, searching for a partner, not a run. Back then, he thought, walking away would free him from the pressure. But now he understood it only chained him to regret. He saw how hard she fought to hold their family together, while he convinced himself leaving was temporary. Watching the memory unfold, he wondered how she survived all the nights he didn't come home. He remembered the arguments, not loud but heavy, filled with words they both regretted the second they left their mouths. She pleaded for him to stay grounded, to stand beside her as life grew harder, but fear made him see responsibility as a trap instead of a home. She became the steady anchor, while he became the storm that tore their peace apart. When he left that night, he told himself it would only be for a little while. Just enough time to clear his head, but he never returned. The memory burned now, the kind that forced him to face how his absence shaped their lives far more than his presence ever did. He found the old neighborhood playground where she used to sit with their child, and seeing it now felt like reopening a wound he tried to pretend had healed. The swings creaked under the weight of memory. The benches seemed colder without their laughter, and he felt the echo of everything he missed. He imagined her there, pushing their child gently, giving him the sweetness of love, even while carrying the bitterness of being left behind. He wondered how many nights she cried quietly, so the child wouldn't see. How many times she reassured him even when she didn't believe the words herself. The emptiness of the space whispered the truth he had avoided for years. As he sat on the cold bench, the weight of his past pressed harder, and he realized regret wasn't enough to make anything right. He needed to face her, not with excuses, but with truth, even if she never wanted to hear him again. He thought of the child who barely recognized him, of the woman who survived alone because he left her no choice. For the first time in years, he understood the difference between wanting forgiveness and earning it. The wind brushed against him and he rose with a quiet resolve. He didn't know if he could make things better, but he knew he couldn't run anymore. Not after seeing how far they had fallen without him. He spent the next morning searching every street where he thought she might have gone, driven not by guilt alone, but by the fear of losing the small chance that remained. The city felt larger than he remembered, every block stretching into another reminder of how far he let their lives drift apart. When he finally spotted them near a crowded bus stop, his breath caught, not from shock this time, but from the silent plea in his chest for another moment to prove he wasn't the man who walked away. She held the child close, the same protective way she once carried him through every hardship he failed to share. He stepped closer, hoping she wouldn't turn away again, hoping the child would see something worth trusting. She noticed him before he spoke, her grip tightening around the child's small hand as if bracing herself for another wound. He tried to speak gently, choosing words that didn't demand forgiveness but offered understanding, yet even his softness made her eyes fill with guarded fire. The child looked between them with confusion, sensing something fragile but not knowing which side of it might break first. She stepped back, creating a distance that felt sharper than any words she could have thrown. He realized then that helping them wasn't about asking for another place in their lives. It was about offering support without expecting anything in return. He reached into his coat and offered them something small: food, warm gloves, anything that might ease their day. But she hesitated, her pride standing tall, even in exhaustion. He respected the strength in her refusal, seeing how many times she must have stood firm against a world that treated her like an afterthought. The child's eyes flickered to the bag in his hand, not with greed, but with the quiet hope of someone who learned early that comfort didn't come often. She finally accepted one item, not for herself, but for her child, and the small gesture felt like the very first crack in the wall between them. He understood how fragile this moment was. For a moment, they stood together in a silence that carried years of things unsaid. He watched the child nibble on a piece of bread, and it felt like seeing a glimpse of what he missed. First steps, first words, all the moments that slipped through his fingers. She shifted uncomfortably, torn between keeping her guard high and allowing a sliver of compassion to soften her. He didn't push, didn't ask for anything, simply stayed still, letting his presence speak where words would fail. She seemed surprised by the gentleness he showed, as if trying to decide whether it was real or just another moment. that would disappear when life became hard again. When the bus arrived, she gathered her things quickly, as if afraid staying any longer would make her heart waver. He stepped aside, giving her space, but the child paused before climbing the steps, looking back at him with a slow, searching gaze. That tiny hesitation made something warm flicker inside him, a sign that maybe he hadn't lost every chance to be better. She gently urged the child forward, her voice quiet but steady, and he watched them board with a mix of hope and dread. As the doors closed, he realized this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of proving he had changed, even if she never fully believed him. The next evening, the cold bit deeper, sharper, as if the city itself sensed something was about to break. He searched again, driven not by desperation but by the quiet fear that the harsh winter would swallow them before he could help. When he finally found them outside a crowded shelter, the line stretched far down the block, and she held the child close to shield him from the bitter wind. He could see the strain in her posture, the tightness in her jaw, the worry hidden behind her steady eyes. The shelter door opened only to announce it was full, and her shoulders sank ever so slightly. The child shivered, burying his face against her coat. In that moment, he knew he couldn't stand by. Not again. Not tonight. He stepped forward gently, offering them a place to stay, not as a man trying to reclaim a past, but as someone refusing to let them face danger alone. She hesitated, torn between pride and the fear of repeating history. The child clung to her, his shaking growing stronger as the wind whipped around them. She glanced toward the closed doors of the shelter, then back at him, weighing the safety he offered against the pain he once caused. He didn't plead. He simply opened his coat wider as if to show he wasn't hiding anything. For the first time, her eyes softened with something more complex than anger, exhaustion mixed with reluctant trust. It was enough. He led them toward a small overnight motel, a place far from luxury, but warm enough to stop the child's shivering. She stayed a few steps behind him, keeping a cautious distance as if ready to pull away at the first sign of danger. Inside the tiny room, the heater hummed weakly, filling the space with a soft warmth that felt like a small miracle after the icy streets. The child curled on the bed, relief washing over his tired features. She didn't sit right away, her eyes scanning every corner, making sure nothing threatened the fragile safety they found. He stepped aside, giving her space to breathe, grateful she allowed him to help, even this. As the child drifted towards sleep, she finally sat down on the edge of the bed, her exhaustion pushing past her defenses. He could see the years of struggle in the way she rubbed her forehead, in the slow breath she took, as if trying to steady herself. He wanted to apologize again, but the words felt useless compared to the weight of what she had lived through. Instead, he spoke quietly about wanting to help them find something better, even if it meant she never forgave him. She listened with guarded stillness, her expression unreadable, but she didn't ask him to leave. That small silence felt like the first sign that maybe trust could be rebuilt, one slow moment at a time. Later, when the room fell quiet except for the heater's steady hum, the child stirred with a soft cough that made her sit upright instantly. Instinct took over as she checked his forehead, her touch tender but filled with worry. Gabriel moved closer, staying slow, asking if he could help. She didn't push him away this time. Together, they wrapped the child in an extra blanket, watching his breathing settle again. In the dim glow, their hands brushed for a brief moment, and she didn't pull back. Something shifted in that fragile silence, something small but real. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't certainty, but it felt like the first piece of hope forming in the cracks of everything broken. Morning arrived slowly, sneaking through the faded motel curtains with a pale light that revealed how worn they all were. She watched the child sleep, her face softening with the kind of love built from years of sacrifice. He stood near the window, unsure he belonged in the same room, yet unable to step away. When she finally looked at him, there was no anger in her eyes, only a tired question. The kind that came from wondering whether people truly changed or only pretended until life pressed them again. He didn't try to defend himself. He simply said he wanted to help in whatever way she allowed. She held the child's hand a little tighter, torn between fear and the small spark of hope she tried to hide. As the child woke, he reached for her instinctively, but his gaze drifted toward the man standing across the room. Something in that small glance made her heart tighten. Not fear, but the painful awareness of how much the child had missed without knowing it. Gabriel knelt quietly, giving the child space to choose. The child looked at him with a mixture of caution and curiosity, not fully trusting, but not afraid either. She watched closely, ready to step between them if needed. Yet something about the calm patience in Gabriel's eyes softened her grip on the moment. The smallest nod from the child felt like a bridge forming. They spent the next hour quietly preparing to leave, each movement filled with tension and unspoken questions. She kept checking the child's forehead, relief evident each time she felt no fever. Gabriel offered to find breakfast, leaving briefly and returning with warm food wrapped in paper. She accepted it without hesitation, a subtle shift that didn't go unnoticed. The child ate slowly, watching them both as if trying to understand how two people who once shared a life could stand together without breaking. She noticed his gaze and felt a sting of guilt, wondering if he carried confusion he was too young to voice. Gabriel saw it too and wished he knew how to ease the ache. After breakfast, she finally asked the question she had avoided for years: why he left. The words came out soft but filled with the weight of survival. He didn't try to soften the truth. He admitted he had been afraid, overwhelmed by pressure, convinced he wasn't enough, and too weak to stay when things grew hard. She listened with a steady face. Though her eyes flickered with the memory of nights she cried alone. He expected anger, but instead she sighed, a long, heavy breath of someone too tired to fight old battles. She told him that leaving didn't just hurt her. It shaped the life of a child who didn't understand why love disappeared. His chest tightened as he heard the truth he had avoided for too long. The child finished drawing and held up his picture, a small family holding hands beneath a simple sun. The innocence of it made her eyes fill with unspoken emotion. Gabriel's breath caught as he knelt beside the child, trying not to let his voice shake when he whispered how beautiful it was. The child didn't say anything, only slipped the paper into his hands as if offering him a chance he didn't deserve. She watched, her heart torn between the fear of repeating past pain and the longing to give her child the stability he deserved. In that quiet moment, she realized the hardest choice wasn't whether to forgive him. It was whether to believe people could grow. The picture trembled slightly in Gabriel's hands as hope settled deeper inside him. They stepped out of the motel into the cool afternoon air, the kind that carried both promise and uncertainty. She walked slowly, holding the child's hand, while he stayed close enough to help but far enough to respect her space. The world felt strangely softer than the night before, as if the storm inside them had quieted just enough to let something new breathe. She noticed the way he watched the child with gentle eyes, not with guilt, but with a longing to understand the little life he had missed. That small shift stirred something inside her, fear mixed with the fragile hope that maybe growth was real. She wasn't ready to trust, but she was willing to see who he was now. They found a small cafe where the windows fogged from the warmth inside, a contrast to the cold wind outside. She hesitated at the door, unsure if stepping into this moment meant stepping into another risk, but the child tugged her hand gently, guiding her in. Gabriel ordered hot drinks for all of them without asking, remembering her preference even after all these years. That tiny detail made her chest tighten. The child sipped slowly, his cheeks warming, his eyes flicking curiously between them. She felt the weight of old memories trying to rise, but she pushed them back, focusing instead on the quiet present unfolding in front of her. As the child colored on napkins, she and Gabriel talked in low voices, Not about the past, but about small things. The weather, possible shelters, places they could go. The simplicity of the conversation surprised her, reminding her of a time before everything grew heavy. He listened more than he spoke, a change she couldn't ignore. He asked how the child had been doing, and she answered honestly, describing the struggles, the nights they had gone without enough warmth, the constant fear of not being able to protect him. His eyes darkened with regret, but he didn't interrupt or defend himself. That silence felt more sincere than any apology he could offer. When they stepped back outside, the sky had begun to clear, the faintest glow of sunlight cutting through the gray. The child walked between them now, not holding Gabriel's hand, but not avoiding him either. They headed toward a local center that offered temporary support for families, a place she had visited before but never stayed long because resources ran thin. Gabriel asked if he could help speak with the staff, and she let him, though her heart thudded with unease at relying on him again, watching him talk calmly, respectfully, and without expectation made her realize how different he was from the man she once knew. Inside the center, they were offered temporary support, nothing permanent, but enough to give her and the child a few days of stability. She looked at Gabriel, waiting for the moment he would pull back as he once did when life became complicated, but he didn't. Instead, he asked how else he could help, not with urgency or desperation, but with quiet sincerity. The child tugged at her sleeve, whispering that he didn't want to go back to the streets anymore, and she felt her heart twist. She wasn't ready to trust fully, yet she couldn't ignore the change standing right in front of her. As she watched Gabriel help carry their small belongings inside, she realized the hardest part wasn't letting him back into their lives. It was admitting she wanted to try. The next morning came with a quiet stillness, the kind that felt fragile enough to break with one wrong step. She woke early, watching the child sleep peacefully for the first time in days, his small breaths steady and warm. Gabriel sat near the doorway, as if guarding the room without wanting to intrude. She studied him silently, unsure whether the man she saw now was a temporary version or the person he had grown into. He sensed her gaze and lifted his eyes gently, not with hope, but with readiness to accept whatever she chose. The weight of her decision tugged at her chest, whether to let him help build a future or walk away before old wounds reopened. She knew that choice would shape not only her life, but the child's. When the child woke, he reached for Gabriel this time instead of shrinking away. The small gesture made her heart pause, unsure whether to feel comfort or fear. Gabriel helped the child with his shoes, moving slowly, showing the gentle care she once begged him to give. She watched every movement, searching for cracks, but all she saw was a man trying his best to right his wrongs. Still, her mind replayed the years of carrying everything alone. The nights she whispered, promises to a crying child, promising safety. She barely believed in herself. She wondered if trusting him again meant risking all of that, or finally letting herself rest. They took a walk outside, the winter sun spreading a faint golden glow across the quiet street. The child walked between them, holding her hand but looking up at Gabriel with growing trust. She noticed how Gabriel matched the child's pace, answering his questions patiently, laughing softly at his small jokes. It felt like watching a life that could have been, one she had long stopped dreaming about. A deep ache settled in her chest, a mixture of grief for the years lost and gratitude for what still might be possible. She didn't know if forgiveness was close, but she could feel something shifting inside her, something warmer than fear. They reached a quiet park bench, its surface dusted with thin snow. The child ran ahead to look at frozen puddles, leaving them standing a few steps apart. Gabriel finally spoke, not asking for another chance, but admitting he didn't deserve one unless he proved he could stay. His voice carried the weight of every night he left her alone, every moment she cried without comfort. She felt tears press against her eyes, not from anger but from the exhaustion of carrying pain. For so long, she told him she didn't know if she could forgive him, not now, maybe not ever. But she saw the change in him, and that mattered more than the fear that still lingered inside her. The child ran back to them with flushed cheeks and slipped his small hand into both of theirs at once, connecting them in a way words never could. In that moment, she felt something inside her ease. Not forgiveness, not certainty, but a soft opening toward possibility. Gabriel looked at her with quiet hope, not pushing, not expecting, just grateful. She squeezed the child's hand and finally met Gabriel's eyes with a steady, honest gaze. She told him that change would take time, that healing wasn't simple, but she was willing to walk forward slowly, if he was willing to stay. His breath shook with relief, and for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a chance. Together, they took the first step into it.